Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Leeds. There we go. Okay, Phil's just done a pretty good job of introducing me, so I don't need to talk about this too much. But yes, I'm Peter Gasston. I'm Stops at Green on the web. My job title is Creative Technologist, but that's not really describing what I do. Phil did give you a pretty good overview of it. But I am what I would describe as a lapsed developer. I was a web developer, front-end developer for many years. But in the last 3 or 4, that's kind of fallen by the wayside. I still code, I still do bits, but our team won't let me anywhere near production environments anymore. My job is kind of just throw things together, see how they work, see what they're good for. When Harry invited me to speak here, I said, well, what should I talk about? And he said, whatever you want. And I was like, that's fantastic, because I've got a cracking talk about the castles on the borders of Wales, which I've been waiting to deliver for years. And he said, no, try and keep it relevant. Okay, so that sort of narrowed my options down. So what I want to talk to you about today is looking at what's the post-mobile platform? What's the next thing after the smartphone? So I'm going to talk about what I think that is. I'm going to give the reasons why I think that is. I'm going to give the things that are missing to get us to that point. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of the web in whatever the next platform may be. When I'm talking about platforms, I'm talking about a technology or a group of technologies which can be used as a base for other applications and businesses and technologies to build on top of. So Android is a platform, iOS is a platform, Facebook is a platform, and the smartphone itself is a platform. You can build things on top of it and make businesses and new opportunities happen. And I'm going to start by defining some terms up front. There's what we're calling, everybody knows about VR, everybody knows about AR, which is putting digital information into the real world. And what's being called MR, or mixed reality, is where you put digital objects into the real world and they have some kind of interaction with it. But this whole thing is not 3 separate technologies. It's kind of a spectrum. And this spectrum is what's being generally referred to as extended reality. Anything that's kind of takes input from the real world and overlays information on top of it. And I think, in my opinion, XR is the next big platform. But nobody really knows exactly what it's going to look like yet. So with that proviso, I think it's going to happen, but nobody really knows exactly the form that's going to take. Augmented reality and virtual reality. Is anybody familiar with the Gartner hype cycle? Every year, Gartner kind of look at all the technologies that are on the verge of maybe becoming a reality, and they rate them for kind of where they think they are in the consumer consciousness. And augmented reality is down here in what's called the trough of disillusionment, which is a horrific term. But it just means that it's been hyped for a few years, and now that we've actually started getting the technology in our hands, everybody's gone, is that it? But that just means it's at the beginning of the next part of the consumer journey, which is kind of breaking through, finding a role, finding a market. We're sort of saying we're getting there with virtual reality now, and that's kind of the slope up to what's called the plateau of productivity. You can tell these are business analysts who write this stuff. I'm using other people's slides at the moment, so I'm going to take one of Luke Robolewski's. This is what, looking at the device factors of sort of the last 15, 20 years, you can see that the desktop computer, which is the desktop and the laptop, they're kind of a declining market now. Smartphone is, I would say, a mature market. It's reaching its peak. Globally, smartphone sales are predicted to rise just about 0.2% this year. Loads of people have got them. It's not necessarily not everybody has them, and still new people will continue to get them, but not at the same rate they've been going on already. And especially in Western Europe and Northern America, we're already seeing kind of quite big drops in how many new people get a smartphone every year. And the growth market, which everybody's talking about, is kind of voice and wrist computers, so Wear OS and Apple Watch and Google Home and Alexa. But the bit I'm really interested in is that bit right at the left there, the emergent market, what's being called face computers. And that's where kind of XR sits. One more slide from somebody else. So this is what's called, there's a thing in business called an S-curve, which basically means technologies start off slow, then they hit an acceleration when they really take off and get into people's hands, and then they plateau at the top. So the smartphone's at the top of that curve, but there's 4 kind of new technologies that people are getting excited about. AI is at the point now where it's becoming commoditized, and so it's like really exploding, taking off. People are making lots of money from it. The bit we care about, mixed reality, is there. We know We've got the tech working at a very basic level. It's not completely there yet, but we know what it's going to be. But it's not yet found its market. It's not yet found what it's actually going to be good at. So let me tell you the reasons why I think XR is going to be the next big platform. When I say the next big platform, I don't mean it's going to replace anything that's there already. I mean it's going to sit within it, but it will be a new opportunity for people to build things. So I think, first of all, it's because we're told it's going to be. That's quite a big reason. We can see for ourselves that that's what people are talking about. But also I think because it fits into a few very fundamental things about human nature, which will make it a big, good market fit. And also I think because we have the foundation of it in place already. Start with the first point, because we are told so. So you can tell by the words of the biggest companies and lots of independents and looking around the market that people think this is a big deal. When Facebook bought Oculus VR in 2014, Mark Zuckerberg said, "We believe one day this kind of immersive augmented reality will become part of daily life for billions of people." And Google have said similar things, and Facebook have said similar things, and Microsoft have said similar things. Tim Cook at Apple has gone one step further. He says, "I regard AR," he said, but XR generally, is a big idea like the smartphone. That's how they're thinking of it. They're thinking of it as big a deal as the smartphone. But not only by the things they say, but just by looking at them. And again, you can look at any company and find this, but Apple are perhaps the most prominent. Some of Apple's moves in extended reality around this for a few years. So in 2013, they bought PrimeSense. PrimeSense make depth sensing cameras. They're what's in the Microsoft Kinect. They're now built into the new Apple iPhone X. And then in 2015, they bought a company called Metaio. Metaio, they have a lot of patents and technology regarding integrating camera images with digital images, which kind of fits this perfectly. Then the next year they bought a company called Flyby, who do spatial mapping and object recognition using depth sensing cameras. In 2017, they bought a company called VRVana. VRVana make an augmented reality headset. They never brought it to market, but they have the technology. They have lots of patents for it, and Apple took over all of those. And then the same year, Apple launched ARKit, which is their kind of software development framework for making augmented and extended reality experiences. Very, very early days for it. It's got a lot of miles ahead of it. But you can see just by the sum of all this that Apple are taking this very seriously. They've invested a lot of money in getting to this point. And you can see by a lot of the patents that they've been filing, and patents have to be open, they have to be filed, so we can see they're looking at things like representing virtual information in real-world scenes, how to interact with that, near-eye displays. So I think it's very clear, just from judging that one company, that something big is happening here, even if they haven't really announced a lot of it yet. So then the second point, I think, is this is something that more fundamentally ties into human nature, and I think really two things about humans that are very persistent. One, we have a desire to know things, and two, we have a desire to be tricked. When I talk about desire to know things, I think you can say the story of human achievement as we know it is the story of knowledge, kind of almost by definition. Our word for knowledge in Latin is scientia, science. So science and knowing are kind of fundamentally bound together. And the written language was kind of developed as the spoken language was developed as a way to pass on knowledge to people in front of you, and written language was developed as a way to pass on knowledge to people a distance from you, or historically in time distant from you as well. We actually record history from the moment people started writing, started using language. Everything before that is what's known as prehistory. And when I was a boy, a long time ago, I used to have this 25-volume set of the Encyclopedia Britannica. And for me, that was the repository of the world's knowledge. And I used to go and look up stuff on that all the time. Anything I wanted to know, I would rush to the Encyclopedia Britannica. You're all probably a bit younger than me, so some of you, it might have been in Carter. And for, of course, many of us, it's the internet. That's what it does. But there's a limit to text, which is sometimes you don't know the thing that you need to ask about. If you're looking at an object and you have no idea what it is, how do you actually go and find out what that thing is? I can't go to the Encyclopedia Britannica and leaf through every page and compare it to what I have in my hands. So sometimes you don't know the right questions to ask. And I think that's one of the big things that kind of computer vision and augmented reality solve. They allow us to look at something, say, what is that, and be told about it. So I think that kind of solves half of the problem that augmented reality or extended reality is going to solve, which is, who's this? Is this cheaper somewhere else? Where did I leave that thing? They're all questions that become possible when we bring vision into the equation. And the other one I said is the desire to be tricked. So we like to be tricked. And what I mean by that is kind of optical illusions. We've always, as humans, enjoyed things that make us believe we're seeing something else. We're hacking our eyes almost. This is a painting from the Lascaux Caves, 21,000 years old. It's some of the oldest known human art. And they've got these paintings of like buffaloes, and they have 8 legs, and it seems really weird. But a couple of years ago, a guy did an experiment where he rebuilt the environment in which they were found, and he brought into it different light sources that would have been around at the time, like a grease lamp. And he found out that when you put a flickering grease lamp into this environment, these things seem to animate. So 21,000 years ago, people were probably, and we don't know this for sure because we can't ask anyone, but probably doing this to be able to kind of bring things to life. Jump forward in time, 7,000 years. This is a thing that nowadays we call a thaumatrope. It's basically a disc that has 2 images, one on each side. When you run a string through the middle and you twirl it, it looks like this deer is running or leaping. So this is probably a children's toy, and it's 14,000 years old. And again, we can't prove that's what it was for, but it doesn't seem to have any other purpose beyond that. And this idea, this technology, the thaumatrope, was sort of rediscovered in the 19th century in exactly the same way that this thing does. But I think where we can start proving this is when we come to the Renaissance and the invention of kind of perspective and the idea of space. Now, this is what we would call a trompe-l'œil, which is like a trick of the eye, essentially. It's been around since the Greeks, as far as we know, but it was perfected in the Renaissance when they discovered perspective. This is the ceiling of the Chiesa di Sant'Ignazio by Andrea Pozzo. And if you stand in there and look straight up at the ceiling, it looks like you're looking up right to God. And this idea of perspective representation kind of aims to give viewers the illusion that they've been transported into a geometrically coherent and psychologically convincing other world, which is exactly what virtual reality does today. This is from about 1800. This is the cross-section of a huge building that was in Leicester Square in London. It was a perfectly round building, and inside they painted this gigantic panorama. They charged people a shilling to come in and stand inside and look around, and it was like they'd been transported to another place. They painted famous battle scenes, and they painted, ancient Egypt, and they charged people to come in and look and feel like they'd been transported to another place. It invoked in people a feeling that at the time was called panorama sickness. People walked in and they would become so disoriented from seeing this thing, they became almost ill, and it was a common term. We've got a letter surviving from the time of a visitor, a man who visited and came to that and wrote to his brother and said, "The effect is very astonishing. I actually put on my hat, imagining myself to be outside in the open air." And then in 1816 was the invention of the kaleidoscope. Now we think of it as a children's toy. In 1816, it was an adult toy, not in that way. It was a toy for adults. But again, you'd hold it up to your eye. It would change what you saw. It would trick your senses. And it became a huge, huge fad. It's mostly forgotten today, but it was an absolutely gigantic fad back in the ages. They termed a coin for it. They called people who use these kaleidoscomanics, because they would just walk around looking at these things. It's very similar to how we describe people with their smartphones today. They look around, they're not paying attention to the world. They walk into the street and hit people on bicycles. One person said, they're so mesmerized by the visions they see inside the picture tube that they do not even notice men are courting their companions behind their backs. This was invented by a guy called David Brewster, who was a Scottish minister, but also extremely interested in optics. He did a lot of very important breakthrough work in using lenses. In 1838, so just about 20 years later, was the invention of what we call the stereograph. The stereograph is taking 2 very similar images, putting them in front of your eyes, so it looks like you're seeing one thing with the illusion of depth. And the same guy, David Brewster, 10 years later, he came up with the idea of putting different lenses in front of those. So you'd look one eye in this lens, you'd see an image that looked real. This is the exact same technology that's being used in the Oculus Rift and the kind of VR headsets of today. But it was invented 160 years ago. So I think this kind of works into the second part of what XR can bring us, which is adding something to the world. This idea of you can just put digital things into the world, so everything becomes a screen. You can put Minecraft on the table in front of you and manipulate it. You can just look at a piece of food and it will show you the recipe and you can work through it. The third and final part for this is because we already have the foundations in place. Everything we need to make this happen is available to us. They're maybe just not joined together in the right way yet. From the lenses in cameras, to the voice interface of the Alexa, of the Echo, to the miniaturized components that we now wear on our wrists, to the enormous cloud data centers that we need to make this happen. Everything, the fundamental technologies of XR to be the next platform are all around us today. A guy called Benedict Evans, I used one of his slides earlier on already, he defines mixed reality as a three-part problem. A display problem, a sensor problem, and a decision problem. That is, show an image that looks real, work out what's in the world and where to put that image, and work out what image you should show. So I'm going to step through each of those in turn now as well, very quickly. In terms of the sensor, the camera used to be very much for taking pictures, taking photographs. But when quizzed in a big survey last year, the first thing people said they take pictures of is scenery, but the second thing was just stuff they wanted to remember. Just, oh, I must remember to have a look at that later. Oh, that's a nice picture. That's a nice pattern. That's exactly the shade of carpet I want for my home. So they're using it just to record things. And with computer vision, with being able to understand what's in an image, that becomes then useful data. Not just a picture, but actually useful data. You can extract meaning from it. You can take actions based upon it. And again, the same guy, he's got this phrase that I trot out in basically every talk I do now, which is that he says, we're going from computers with cameras that take photos to computers with eyes that can see. This is very important for extended reality. And already is being built into our consumer technology, from Google Lens to Pinterest, visual search, even to Snapchat, which has filters where if you take a picture of your dog, it will work out it's a dog and just suggest that you should use dog filters. Very, very subtle little ways. All of these are using computer vision. And not just them, there's ASOS are doing it for visual search. Kim Kardashian's new Screenshot app lets you take a picture of something and it'll recommend where you can buy that. So it's become like a consumer integrated technology already. So it's right here. But not only for kind of things like this that enable commerce and information, but my friend Leonie, who's been blind for a very long time, she uses an app from Microsoft which literally describes the world around her to her. And she said that she's finding this absolutely an incredibly liberating experience. To be able to just hold a phone up, point it around, and being described to her what's around her. She has no vision whatsoever. Usually she relies on people to tell her this stuff. This has given her independence. And so computer vision has become commoditized in a very short time. Just 5 or 6 years ago, it was only the people at the big research labs and at universities or people who had lots of data could do this. It was the preserver scientists. Now you can just rent them from companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Clarify, and you can train and build your own models. In an incredibly short period of time, this has become a largely solved problem. There's one more thing missing from this, though, which is actually knowing a bit more about the world around you. This is a technology that's generally referred to as simultaneous location and mapping. So knowing where you are, what's in the world. So this is what the Apple's PrimeSense cameras do, and lots of other cameras can do this replicated with software. It builds up a picture of the environment, finds distances between things, knowing where you are, what's around you. And that allows you to then put digital objects in that are sympathetic to the environment that they're in. They're not just overlaid. It's not like Pokemon Go, which is really just sticking a sticker almost on what's in front of you. This actually lets you move things underneath, into, above, and over objects in the environment. The next item is the display. So right now, we're generally using what's called video see-through display, which is what you have in your cameras. So it takes a video image and remixes it, and that's what it projects to your eye, essentially. So that's really common. What's becoming, and probably will be the way of the future, is what's called optical see-through. So it's projecting light into your eyes. It's adding light to your environment that makes you think the thing is there. It's not a video screen between you and the world. You're seeing everything that you're seeing right now, but there's more light in there than actually exists. That's what HoloLens does to a degree, and it's what Magic Leap, who I don't know if many of you have heard of those, they're much hyped AR glasses company. That's what they're doing. And that's expected to be the way of the future for most things. Don't get hung up by what the glasses look like. They look like swimming goggles at the moment. But think about what mobile phones looked like in the 1990s, great big bricks of things. That's the mobile brick equivalent of what the XR glasses should look like. Phone-based AR or XR is generally a social impediment. You have to hold your phone up like that and move it all around you. It's not very comfortable. That's not a natural position for our phones. Again, going back to what Leonie said, she said that's the only drawback she has with it now is that she has to hold her phone up like that and move around, and it can be uncomfortable when you're talking to someone. And also, just freeing up your hands gives you an incredible sense of just place, of just being there. I don't know how many of you have used Snapchat spectacles. The one job they do is just record video or record footage, but having them on your head means your hands become available in the picture, and that suddenly is a really liberating thing to do. You can do a lot more activities and see and feel really as if you were there, much, much more than if everything's being taken at a phone from held in front of you. So where we are right now is we're able to put digital things into physical spaces. This is the IKEA app, or this is a Google camera thing, and we're able to remix the image that comes into your face. This is sort of the state of where we are now, but there's still one or two bits missing, especially in the middle one, the IKEA app, if you've ever used it or something like it. Yes, it looks like the thing is in your house, but then if your cat walks through it, it just completely destroys the illusion already. Whereas with where we want to get to is being able to know, as I said, using that room scanning, doing that slam, so understanding what's in the room, and objects being able to go underneath and hide behind and do all this stuff. So the next step after that will be to actually know what the thing they're hiding behind is. So is it a bottle of beer or is it a bottle of Coca-Cola, and being able to react appropriately based on those. And the final thing that's missing from this is the thing that makes the decisions about what you see. Quick warning that the next slide has got some very bright flashing GIFs on it, so if anybody is kind of photosensitive, I would advise you to take precautions now. I don't know how many of you have seen this film called Hyperreality. Anyone seen this? Show of hands. So Hyperreality is a guy imagining what the augmented reality future will look like. This incredibly garish and noisy thing. It's a great video, and I think it's absolute nonsense. I don't think we're going to be anything like that at all. First of all, if that's the way it was, why would anybody choose to wear that? Why would you even wear this thing that made the world around you give you a headache? And the second is there's so much stuff being shown here, but it's not told you anything about who makes the decision of what you see. If I'm holding up a bottle of beer, do I see information from the manufacturer? Do I see information from the retailer? Do I see information from someone else? Who makes the decision about what the thing you're looking at, the information that is showed to you? And I think in mixed reality especially, what you don't see is probably as important as what you do. Like being able to filter out the things in front of you and just show you the relevant information is a really important thing to consider. You're probably using algorithmic priority, someone making that decision for you. And I think, again, the building blocks are in place to do this. And it's all these things. It's Google Assistant. It's Siri to a much lesser degree. It's Bixby, Alexa, Duo, Cortana. All of these things are built to just give us a single answer to the question that we're asking them. They prioritize. It's not like Google Search or the old Google Search. The old Google Search would give you a page of 10 results and say, we think that's the best one, off you go. The new one tries to give you just the answer that you want, or at least related information to let you find the thing you want much, much faster. They're making a lot of those decisions on your behalf now based on what they know about you and your history and the world and what everybody else is doing. And especially if you've used Google Assistant or a thing called Dialogflow, which is what they use for natural language understanding, they have this system that they call an intent. An intent is what a user wants to do, and your job as someone building apps or building things for these platforms is to try and understand what that user wants and just give them back the answer they need. On a web page, it's easy. If someone clicks a link, you know that they want to follow the link to whatever they've clicked. But when you don't have links, when you don't have that UI, when you're just looking at things or asking things verbally, you don't always have that context about exactly what it is they want to do. So with user intents, this would allow things like you're walking around in the world, you see a poster of an athlete, you can look at it and you say, hey, how can I run like her? And it would have to know then what's the best result to give you to say, this is whoever, and this is her training program, and this is the information that you need to be able to run like her. So we've got all that. So what's actually missing? What's missing from us being able to turn XR into the next platform? What do we need to get there? The first thing is, this is from a personal point of view, is I think we need more diverse voices. While I was researching this talk, all I found was, many, many smart people are talking about this. They're invariably men. They're invariably Silicon Valley type men. They're of a very particular Silicon Valley type mindset. And I think a platform like this that suddenly brings us closer to the world, that's not kind of disambiguated, disintermediating through a phone, needs to be more reflective of the values of the world that it's in. We need the voices of more women. We need the voices of more people of color. We need the voices of more artists and poets and philosophers to get involved in this thing, to stop it becoming just a commercial media. To go back to the Renaissance again, the ideas of perspective and space were not brought by scientists, they were brought by artists, painters, philosophers, poets. All of these people helped bring these through into the kind of the public awareness. In terms of technically what we're missing this shared space. So we have the tools to do everything, to look at something and to tell us what to do, but there's no way for me to share what I have with you, or for you to be sure that the thing that you're seeing is the same thing that I'm seeing, in the same place, in the same state. AR, one of the great things about AR, it has the ability to re-enable scarcity. You can tie things very clearly into location. This thing only becomes available when you're right here looking right at that thing. One of the things, the web went to everybody, which is a fantastic thing, but it also kind of took away that idea of things being scarce. It became available to everyone, everywhere, all the time, which sometimes is a good thing, sometimes not what you want. I read a really fascinating thing with an internal team at Nike called 23NYC, and they're talking about this idea of being able to, of course, their thing is advertising, but I think the kind of broader points are more interesting. They said you can take over subway walls, posters, and turn them into stores. Why would you want to do that? Well, they could sell 100,000 shoes online, not a problem. But 100,000 shoe sales online is just someone sitting somewhere clicking a button, which is great for commerce, but it's not good for culture. You can't create a culture if everybody's just kind of sat at home doing the same thing. So what they're thinking is the future of Nike, and Nike depends so much on being visible and being aware, is the future of Nike is getting off the web necessarily, or off the phones, and back out into the real world. Seamlessly blend the real and the digital world. That enables them to propagate their culture. And we can take the lessons that Nike learn, and we can use those for ourselves as well. And the biggest thing that's been missing for the last decade, since we got mobile phones, since we got everything, probably the longer time to be honest, is this idea of a physical embodied space. Everything came through a screen to us. Now, in the future, everything would still come through a screen to us, but it's going to feel more like it's the real world again. We could read the same document before, but now we can actually see the same thing. We can collaborate on things that are right in front of us. So again, this goes back to the idea of SLAM, of doing these things, but my SLAM map is not going to be the same as your SLAM map. If we've got a thing where we're seeing a digital object, and I reach out my hand and touch it and move it, if you're sitting in the same place as me and you look, if you're not sharing the exact same map as me, it's going to look like I'm touching something else. We miss entirely that idea of sharing and collaborating on the same thing. So we need a way to share this SLAM data to make it publicly available, or some steps towards that. And what's this generally being referred to as kind of the AR cloud. The AR cloud is a big idea. It's a shared digital memory of the physical world. Everybody gets access to it. Everybody can see it. Everybody can interact with it. And this is being talked about as the most valuable thing in technology right now, far more valuable than Facebook's social graph or even Google's PageRank index, a shared memory of the world. This enables sharing, this enables collaboration. And you can see companies moving into this. Google Maps recently released a version just for gaming, so anybody can build their own Pokemon Go style game, for example, using real world locations around you. And of course, that's just their first step towards an AR cloud. They've also got this thing called VPS, which is a virtual positioning system like GPS, but for indoors. So they're working on this stuff. They're not the only ones. They're the ones most kind of publicly working on this. But then that kind of brings us the question is, do we want the same players to be dominating the next space in the same way that they're currently dominating this one? So that brings us to the role of the web, finally. What does the web have to do in all this? What's the web's role with this? The web is the best defense we currently have against anybody dominating one thing. Theoretically, anybody can build for the web, publish on the web, and be noticed in the same way. It's not beholden to any particular platform. The web has absolutely transformed the world, but it's not integrated with it. It is separate. We use it on our desktops and we use it on our phones. The web has the opportunity to be brought back into the real world, into things all around us. One of the ideas that's being floated is this thing called a mixed reality service. Mixed reality service is basically DNS for the AR cloud. So where DNS maps a namespace to a URL or to IP addresses, then MRS maps a coordinate space to a URL. So you could say, at this lat long and at this height above sea level, put this URI. Also, where it says false, that means make it public. Because, of course, sometimes you don't want people putting things into your space. You definitely do not want to allow people the opportunity to put abusive messages or things that are harmful to you or anybody, offensive to anybody else into your space. So the idea is you can say, no, this is a closed space. Nobody else can put things in here. But more fundamentally is like, what do we want the web to be in this new space? This is a concept thing from HoloLens, where every app basically becomes a window floating in space. And I think this is really horrible basic thinking. Now, of course, that's not the long term of this. But if everything just became, oh, we're going to take the exact same web we've got it now, but we're going to float it in a window above your table, that's not an interesting future to me at all. Mozilla recently announced a new browser called Firefox Reality. It's not a version of Firefox, it's a brand new browser built from the ground up for mixed reality. Of course, you can still browse the web in it. The 2D web's not going to go away just because we move into a third dimension. Everything we've already got will still be there. So you'll be able to kind of browse it in this way if you want to. But what's more interesting is the thinking they're doing about mixing things, about having objects that work in different contexts. So on the left, you see a model on a web page. You can then take that entire model. If you were then to switch your headset into VR mode, you would be able to take that object and bring it into your own reality. Or if you're wearing an AR headset on the same web page, that model would become something that could be placed in your world. This is still very early thinking about it, but I kind of like this about things working in different contexts, depending on our slider of where we are in reality. They're using this, they're kind of leading a thing that's, it's led by them, but it's not one of their things. It's an open, anybody can join in, anybody can collaborate, anybody can commit, a thing called WebXR. WebXR is a new API or framework, I guess, which kind of lets you create VR and AR experiences embedded in the web. So when you're viewing them in different contexts, they take on different meanings and different functions. Magic Leap, who I mentioned earlier, they're also talking about this. They haven't announced their web SDK yet, but they have one coming, which is this idea of just being able to pull things out of the web and put it into your reality. Likewise, this is from Google. This is a concept they did called Article. So you could be using a web page, and if you had AR capability on your phone or wherever you were, or your headset, you could just grab objects, pull them out, view them in the real world, and move around and look around them. And even Facebook are kind of in on this game, still to a very early stage, but late last year they announced that you could now put 3D objects into posts. So as well as putting your pictures and your videos and your mum's favorite memes, you can put 3D objects in there. And again, in the future, if you were to view this through their Oculus headset or their Oculus AR headset, whatever that's going to be, these things you'd be able to kind of drop them out, move them around, put them into your new reality. But I think even beyond this, knowing that this is coming, but it's still maybe 5 years away, bits and pieces are here now, but for this to really hit that rocket fuel stage is maybe 5 years away. We've got more of an opportunity to maybe actually reconsider what we want the web to be. Maybe it's time for us to start being, the poets and the philosophers and the painters of this new thing. Here's one idea, and I'm not saying this is the idea, but it's one idea I've seen recently which I really like, and it starts with the Facebook feed. Facebook themselves have hinted that the feed may not be the future of Facebook. They don't think it probably is. They're saying that probably stories are going to be the one format that will be the most shared everywhere. What I mean by stories is you probably kind of escape them. They're in everywhere. They're in Snapchat, Instagram, Messenger, Facebook. Google AMP have released a version. YouTube have their own version. Twitter Moments, even Netflix are in on this. and they're basically self-contained nuggets of content. They're the first probably genuine, uniquely mobile content format. They don't have the same effect on different things. But they're not shareable between platforms. I can't take my Google AMP story and put it into Snapchat or vice versa. So I saw a really, really cool concept by Brian and Stephanie Rieger of this thing called Hopscotch, which is a thing they were working on for Mozilla. And it takes the idea of stories or the format of stories, but it makes them remixable, adaptable, interactive, and most of all, shareable. They're using this new spec that's not been quite finalized yet, but called Web Package, which allows you to put everything you need to execute this thing into one distinct file. And then that makes it super shareable with everybody else. The way they describe this is rich, bite-sized nuggets of narrative that could easily pivot into even richer storytelling by embedding short videos or linking to longer-form external media, or more appropriately for my talk, into 3D. So you could actually take little chunks of the web, share them around to people. You no longer have to go to a website to see what somebody's saying. You could just have a little story which has all the data it contains, and that becomes something that's, you know, a more fundamental reimagining of what the web, I think, could be in a future that's beyond the browser. Our current idea of what qualifies as a site, says Stephanie, and the value or lack thereof that this implies, may be the thing that's holding the web back. Maybe us thinking about the browser and thinking that you have to go to a website to see something is kind of actually retarding what we want to get to. So again, this is one idea. It's not so much the format that's important as the fact that it's making the web better suited for a less screen-bound future or a less mobile device-bound future. And this is kind of the thing I really want to get to, is the idea of like just this richer, more shareable web, I think is really important for the future, when we become much more of a visual interface-based technology. So like in one area, such as page layout, we saw in Rachel's talk this morning, the web has matured remarkably as a visual medium. We now know exactly where to put things, where to gain the most attention, but we're still putting text everywhere pretty much. But if we look at messaging in particular, we can see that the explosive growth in messaging has been through visual mediums. It's been through emoji, and it's been through GIFs, and it's been through stickers. Text is becoming a visual medium. And that allows us to engage other parts of our cognition when given the chance. It adds much richer, more context to a conversation than a string of text can convey. And so as the web kind of gets closer to us, when it comes in smartphones and smart glasses and smart headphones and smart environments, we should be thinking that our world is not just text, but the web, as it becomes part of this world, also must become more like the world. In the WebXR spec, they have this really cool thing where they're explaining what XR means, and most people say extended reality, but for them, the X is really not part of an acronym, but it's a thing that just means your reality goes here. So I think that's really cool. I don't know what form the next platform will take, definitely, but I think whatever it is, the web has to adapt to meet it. And I think the web is the best thing that's best placed to become that X in XR. Thank you very much.